Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. I wanted to start today with a question. I wanted to ask you, how has police work changed you as a person? How are you different before and since doing the job? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about what we witness on a daily basis and how it's changed us and what it's done to us? And has it affected your relationships? And maybe not even for, the worst, but what has it done? So let me introduce myself. My name is Steve Warneke. I did 15 years with the Denver Police Department, 9 of them as a sergeant. I was on the street most of my time there. But the last 2 years before I left, I got tapped to do something really interesting. They brought me to the Public Information Office, and the deputy chief who brought me there said, I have this vision, and I want you to help me with it. So we started trying to take back communication from the media. So we used Twitter to tweet out updates about homicides, road closures, accidents, DUIs. We started doing this. And we would do it before we would tell the media. They didn't like that, of course, because in the media, it's important who has the information first. So we started putting out our own information. We went a step further and we used Facebook, and we used the videographer from the police academy, and we started producing our own content. Our work won 2 Emmy Awards and 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards, which was pretty cool. And I've been traveling around speaking, and I've been asked to train police departments also on what we're going to talk about today. So I want to tell you my story and how I got into this. After I left the Denver Police Department, my father dies, and I wanted, you're going to think I'm crazy, I wanted to move to Florida. That's not something you hear a lot. Everyone's like, it's too hot, it's too humid. I wanted to move to Florida, and I had a lot of other things I wanted to do. So I left the police department. I thought, if I keep getting promoted, I'm never going to leave, so I want to see what I can do. I had other things I wanted to accomplish. And one of those was to publish my book, From Boy to Blue, which I put out pretty soon after I retired. And, I have a mission to eliminate police suicides, to improve the quality of life of law enforcement in America, and also to restore the trust and respect that police officers deserve in this country. The book tackles that last part of the mission. And so it was because we have that oversight that I wanted to speak out from the officer's perspective. And now that I'm not with the police department, I had the ability to do that, because when I'm in the PIO, you can't say a lot of stuff, right? So you're restricted in what you can say. So the chains get broken off, and I release the book, and I start doing articles and podcasts. Go back in time, I'm 5 years old, my parents are getting a divorce, my mother says to me, you are going to therapy. And I said, what, you're getting a divorce? You guys should go to therapy, not me. But she made me go to counseling, and my sister, and we went for years. And I guess I just never thought it wasn't something that everybody did. So it's just kind of the way I grew up. My mom did it, I did it, it's just in the family. And I always thought that that's what everybody did. So I talked openly about it at the police department. Even as a sergeant at roll call, I went to the police psychiatrist on a regular basis. And not because I had any necessarily issues, but because I wanted to make progress with where I was at. And I found that through counseling, what might take me 2 or 3 years to get past on my own, I could do more quickly. And for me, that translated into a better quality of life because I'm not stuck in this hamster wheel of the same problem, right? I'm making progress, I'm moving on, and I'm growing. So I leave the police department. You know how it is. You're working around police. Your life is the police. Your friends are the police, right? It's what you're doing 40, 50, 60 hours a week, however many you're doing it. And I leave Denver and I move to Florida, and now I'm not a police officer. I am not at the police department. I have no police friends. And I started to notice, hey, some things have changed about me. I was having trouble making friends. I was very distrustful of people. I always was on guard. I could not relax. I was sort of antisocial, and I thought, well, this is a problem now, because I don't know where this came from, but it slowly worked its way into, my psyche. And so I started writing about it, and I'm in counseling, of course, because I was telling you that's just what I do. And I was making progress, and I start to see some light at the end of the tunnel. Well, now I go home to Denver, and I visit with my friends who are still cops, or they come stay with me in Florida, and I see things, and I'm like, hey, that's what I was doing. Well, that's what I was doing. So I start writing about this, right? And all of a sudden, I start getting this big response from law enforcement from the internet, just saying, hey, wow, you hit this on the head, and thank you for what you're saying. And I think, oh, I'm really onto something. So I wanted to know more, but you see, we're talking about this in an abstract fashion, right? These things, I was antisocial, I had some changes. What does it mean? So names are important. That's how we do things in this society, right? They're a key to what society values. One of my favorite quotes was from David Slauson, and he's an anthropologist, and they recognize naming things as one of the chief methods for imposing order on perception. So there's a storm in the background there. I live in Florida. We just narrowly missed Hurricane Dorian, thankfully, which was a Category 5 hurricane. And imagine now we're all back in the caveman days, and we're used to thunderstorms. There's rain, there's lightning, it's coming and going, and all of a sudden this hurricane's coming, but we don't know it. So it starts to rain, and we're just at the camp hunting and gathering, and then pretty soon we have 180-mile-an-hour sustained winds and 220-mile-an-hour gusts and 20-foot storm surge. We're going, this is not a thunderstorm, right? If I tell you right now a thunderstorm is coming today, you guys will go, oh, okay. If I tell you a hurricane's coming, that's different. Well, how did that happen? Because we named it, we identified what it was, we started talking about and categorizing it. There's 5 categories of hurricanes. Certain things make it fit into, category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We developed tools like radar so we could see it coming, right? And we also developed protocols. We evacuate, we bring in supplies, we change the highway so that everything's going northbound, everybody can get out of Florida. And we built our structures out of, even my house is not built out of 2x4s and plywood. It's built out of CBS construction. And we have hurricane windows. These hurricane windows can take a 2x4 that's 8 feet long. They throw it 200 miles an hour at your window, and it will not break. So we did all that because we identified what this was. And now we take steps to mitigate our loss and to make the storm more tolerable. And that's what I want to do for you today. I want to make your foundations stronger. I want to give us some radar so that we can be on the lookout, that if this storm comes into your life, that you can see it and have some protocols in place to make things better before you end up in a situation where you feel like things are hopeless. So I called what I'm talking about law enforcement distress syndrome, and I defined it as a psychological condition that is developed by some police officers, and it's due to prolonged exposure to threat. You guys, we are under threat, right? You're just always under threat while you're at work, sometimes while you're not at work. And this also is constantly witnessing violence, trauma, victimization, gore, accidents. What does it do to a human being when everybody you talk to 40+ hours a week, their house has been burglarized, their car has been stolen, they've been shot, stabbed, mugged, raped, beaten, impersonated? I mean, what does that do to you over the course of a month, 5 months, 6 months, a year? The media is starting to write about this, right? They're calling it cumulative PTSD. I think it's helpful if we just come up with a name and identify it. So I came up with the 8 symptoms that I have observed in myself and others regarding law enforcement distress syndrome, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. All right, so PTSD is certainly something police officers have to deal with, and the mental health people that I've consulted with agree that this is different enough to warrant its own designation. There's a little bit of overlap you'll see, but for the most part, if PTSD is a tornado that can affect people, like 5 of you are involved in a critical incident, you go to a horrific scene, something happens at work, whatever, that is something you need to be aware of and know the signs and symptoms of and get help for. You can't just shove it down in the jar of, I'm never going to deal with this. because it doesn't work like that, right? But law enforcement distress syndrome is different. This is continuous exposure to multiple traumatic events, to this gore, crime, victimization, accidents over and over and over. I write this hypothesis about it, and I certainly have experienced a lot of it. I've seen most of this, and I'm like, okay, I want to know if it's a thing, if so, how widespread is it, and how prevalent is it? So I do this year-long research study. Over 1,000 police officers take part in this. And the results, as you will see, I think were astounding. I not only confirmed what I've been talking about, but it was more severe and more prevalent than I thought. If PTSD is the tornado, then LEDS is the slow-moving hurricane because it just comes in slowly. You just kind of change slowly as you become the police. But I keep getting this overwhelming response again from people writing me saying, I feel better just having read this. You put into words exactly what I'm going through. And I know I'm onto something, so I'm like, all right. I became a cop to help people. I left the police department. I'm not helping people anymore, so a little piece of that is missing for me. And I start doing this, and I feel like I'm helping. And I'm helping the police this time. Because you guys are out helping everybody else, and who the hell's helping you, right? Well, I'm hoping that's gonna be me. So I'm hoping this helps you today. I wanna just do something really briefly before we start with this. I wanna just talk to you about mindfulness, because mindfulness is like a paradox, I think, because it's very tricky, and it's also the simplest thing in the world. If you have practice with mindfulness, that's great. If you don't, let me just give you a quick analogy, because I want you to try to, as best you can, be in a mindful spot this morning. And just think about you, what you've been through, and if any of these apply to you. These symptoms aren't, I have it, I don't, one end or nothing. There's a whole spectrum in the middle, right? I would say that for me, some of these were worse than others, and I'll tell you about my experiences with these. But I had most all of them. So mindfulness is like this little separation, right? Think about a courtroom and a judge. If you're the judge and you're up on the center and you're listening to the arguments from the attorneys, if you were an attorney giving the arguments, doing the questions, having everything prepared, you would know what you're gonna say. You'd be involved in the fight. You're down on the ground. You know, you're in it, right? You're hooked. But this is more of a half step back. So you're just witnessing what's being said in your own brain, in your own body. What am I thinking? What am I saying to myself? Does this apply to me? How do I feel about this? And while we do this, just go through and take a mental inventory. Just like, does this apply to me? Where am I at on this? If I had to rank myself on a spectrum, is this a problem for me? And I want to make it clear that if you're coping with the job and everything that's happening to you, that is great. I'm not trying to tell anybody where they should go or how they should be, but this would have been really neat to learn in the academy, because you could file this away under, I might need this someday. Or maybe you have a coworker that needs this someday. Or a family member or a friend or somebody that you could say, I remember that day when I heard about law enforcement distress syndrome, and I think it might help. So that's where I'm hoping you can be while we talk about these. All right, so hypervigilance. You're police officers. Vigilance is important. If you're not vigilant, you're gonna be killed at work. So vigilance is important. Hypervigilance is when you are constantly evaluating your environment. It's this belief that unless you are guarding, on guard all the time, that something bad is going to happen to you. Relaxation becomes difficult. Our bodies are not meant to not recover, right? So the job of police officer, you have to be on guard. We sit with our backs, right, at the restaurant, up against the wall. I'm not even saying don't do that. That's probably a great idea. You're the police, you have the gun, you should have your back to the wall. That's important. But at what point does vigilance turn into hypervigilance? And at what point does this start to permeate its way into your private life? Do you feel safe at home? I had a friend of mine, probably my best friend on the police department, who had been on much longer than me, who was really bad in this symptom. When he retired, I was visiting with him at his house. He lives in a nice neighborhood. It was a suburban area. Nobody was even around, and I went to visit him. And when he went to walk me to my car, he comes out. He's got bars on the window, security gates, and he's locking all of the locks to walk me to my car, which is 30 feet from his door that you can see the car. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I don't want anybody to sneak in while I'm walking you to your car behind me. Now, that's an extreme example. I never got to that point, but I did get to the point where I was always on guard, where I couldn't relax. And as you'll find out, sometimes that even involves your home. Well, what does that do to you physically if you can't if you can't rejuvenate, if the cortisol is being released all the time. We're not meant to do that. So take an inventory of where you're at with this. So what did my research show? Well, I did this research. 65% of the police officers say they feel like they're constantly searching for threats. So they agreed with that statement. 51% of police officers believe if they're not paying attention, they'll be victimized. We're not here to argue whether or not that may or may not be true. The perception here is the reality. So look at these things, and as we go through the data today, please look at these things in a term that police love, in a totality of the circumstances, right? Because some of these could be, one of these questions you could argue, well, that could mean this or that. But when you look at this as a whole, I find it overwhelming. 57% of police officers are more anxious about travel now than before they were cops. This was me. So I love to travel a lot, right? And I got to the point where I wasn't traveling. When I got home from vacation, I was exhausted because I go on this vacation, I don't have my gun usually, right? Or if it's out of the country or something, and you don't even want to check it on a plane anymore. But it's like, and I just felt like if I'm not paying attention, I'm victimized, I got things in the safe, I'm hiding things, 2 wallets, and I just was taking it too far. And I think it's important, like none of us should walk down, an alley outside of New Orleans at 2 in the morning so we can get robbed. Like there are things you need to do and reasonable precautions that you need to take. And we're not talking about those. We're talking about at what point does this become where you can't even enjoy your vacation, which is where I was. And is it affecting your quality of life where you're not doing the things you want because these symptoms have started to detract you from doing them or dissuade you from doing those activities? That's where I want to avoid everybody getting to, okay? 25% of police officers believe the danger of being victimized by a crime at home is high. That's only a quarter, but if here we got a quarter of the police that I surveyed saying that they're worried about being a victim at home. So are you and can you recover at home? 9% of the police officers can relax easily in public. Yeah, that's tough, right? And I'm just looking at this as a totality. 16% of officers agree they can be relaxed at work. Okay. Revenge or vengeance paranoia is the second symptom. This comes from the belief that your actions on duty, even if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, could be answered with retaliation and revenge, or will be, whether that be an erroneous complaint, whether that be somebody trying to find you. I mean, how many times, I don't know how many times I had somebody say, I'm going to find you later and kill you, or I'm going to look up your family later and kill you. A lot, right? I mean, it's not every day, but it was more than I can remember. And so, or people did make a complaint, an erroneous complaint, and you have to go through the internal affairs process. So, but does that start to affect you and your behavior, and do you start to worry about that? And what does that look like? 67% of police officers we surveyed said they're scared to post about themselves or their family on social media. A lot of the country just takes that for granted. They post everything they're doing on Facebook, right? And we're like, I don't want anybody to know I'm not home, right? I don't want to tell anybody I'm on vacation. They're going to know where I live. They're going to burglarize my house. Or I don't want people to know where I'm at with my family because I'm vulnerable. 45% of the police officers believe their home is a target for crime because they're cops. Before I was a policeman, I thought, nobody would mess with me when I'm the police. And then when you become the cop, you're like, oh yeah, people would mess with me, right? So you don't want your neighbors to know you're the police. You're worried about any of that. I had a lady I never met, lived around the corner from me, and of course word gets out. Somebody sees you in your uniform and they tell everybody that you're the police, right? And she brings her young daughter to the house and she says, she rang the doorbell. I never met her in my life. Didn't even know she lives around. I live around the corner, and I brought my daughter here because I told her and I taught her this is where she needs to come if there's an emergency. It's like, that is a terrible idea, Teach her to call 911, right? So I'm just saying, like, we're talking about this being at the house, right? Your house being a target. One day I came home, my mailbox was smashed in. It's the only one on the street. I'm like, oh, that's because I was the cops. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But is that what are you thinking about, right? 45% of police officers have been the target of revenge or retaliation, they say. So it does happen, and police officers some of them are ambushed in cars and murdered. So it's not that it doesn't happen, it's that how much are you thinking about it? How much is it affecting your behavior? And what effect is it having on you? 76% of the cops we surveyed believe people would not be scared to seek revenge simply because they're the cops. Here we go again, like, I thought nobody will mess with me if I'm the police. No, and then when you become the cops, you're like, people would totally mess with me because I'm the police. And you gotta be, and the thought is you have to be on guard. 64% of police officers don't want their neighbors to know they're cops. We talked about that, okay. So the third symptom, a distrust of others and motivations. Look, good cops should be distrustful. You can't be interviewing somebody and say, did you kill him? No. Oh, okay, thanks. We believe you. We look for corroboration, right? You're supposed to do that. But are you starting to distrust family? If you're starting to think that people are only motivated by selfish and evil and nefarious actions, in extreme cases, this can lead you to disassociate yourself from friends and family. So I will tell you, I never disassociated myself from my family. They're everything to me. But I did from my extended family because it's like, you go to Christmas and Thanksgiving, and they're like, I got pulled over last month, and he was such a jerk. And you're like, oh, I got to hear this here too, you know? Or just things I don't think like they understood very well. And they would come, can you believe all the use of forces that are going on, these cops beating everyone? You're like, oh, I got to hear this. That's family dinner. Well, my immediate family didn't do that, but. So if you start to like distrust people, I definitely like started to push the family away, and I noticed that my circle of friends got smaller, and I was hanging out with people like it just got smaller. The gentleman I told you about, my best friend, had 3 friends when I met him, and when he retired, he had 1, me, and he had just really, really pushed everybody away, including family. He is who I think about in the extreme version of most of these symptoms. The research that we did, 56% of police officers do not believe what people tell them. That's smart. 62% of police officers like animals more than people. So, do you know why I asked this? Because this guy that I'm telling you about had 2 dogs that he liked more than anyone. And how many I'm even guilty of saying I like dogs more than people, right? I said that a lot. Because you know when you come home and your dog is happy to see you, he's not faking it. It's one of those things, like if you just start, and I think dogs are good, by the way, but I just thought that was that's why we asked that. 40% of police officers don't believe people are generally good. So now you have almost half of the cops we surveyed that just don't believe in the goodness of mankind. They're just like, people, yeah, they're generally looking out for selfish and evil things, right? 41% of police officers believe their significant other lies to them. I don't know if this is testimonials to who we're picking for significant others, or are we becoming distrustful in our personal relationships? If this is happening to you at work, and now it's getting into your private lives, that's a problem. Now, start to think about this, right? You're always on guard. You're distrustful of others. You're worried that your actions are going to bring about retaliation. And you tack this other one, the next symptom onto it, you're starting to become antisocial. This is a recipe for disaster, right? If all of these things start to happen. And I'm not saying they're going to be, you don't even have to be a huge, far down the spectrum of this, but just be taking an inventory of where you're at and saying, like, is this happening to me? And if it's to the point where it's affecting your quality of life, awareness is the key here. So once you go, I pointed this out to the cops that come stay with me. I said to my friend, do you want to go to the beach? And he goes, no, there's too many people there. Is there a beach where there's no people? I'm like, no, we could. Or he won't go to the bar. They won't go to concerts or venues where there's people. They don't, I noticed the cops I travel with are way more anxious than other people, and they're on guard, right? And they can't relax. So I think this is the hurricane that's coming because it's putting people in this situation where you're losing your support systems in some cases slowly, right? And you don't trust people, and you're always on guard, and you're exhausted, and now it's driving people into this antisocial thing. It's really a bad place to be. How are you going to get help when this is what's happening? Officers suffering from antisocial behavior tend to start avoiding people that are not inside the inner circle. Start to avoid the crowds and events, and in extreme cases, begin to disassociate, like I told you from my friend. 55% of the cops we surveyed said they find it hard to make new friends since they became the police. 58% say most of their friends are cops. 88% say that the media is against the police, which is probably true. But what happens when, so if you are surrounded only by other cops and they're also having this universal experience or experiencing some of the same symptoms, it may not stand out to you that these changes have occurred if they're occurring in you. So 88% of police officers say the media is against the police. 93% say the public doesn't understand the job. I also agree with that. 50% said the department doesn't stand up for them even if they do the right thing. And 62% said that they don't believe people respect the police. So now you add this on to what I was just saying. And now the media is out to get you, right? The department doesn't stand up for you. People don't respect you. People don't understand you. And it's a recipe for a dangerous road, which is why I believe that we're seeing so many problems and police officers are having trouble dealing with it. The next symptom is interesting. This is one that I identified in therapy that I was having. Sorry, I didn't bump the microphone there. So we respond to these situations every day where mundane activities, people just doing regular things, get involved in an accident, there's serious injury, there's death, and for me, in particular, I began to think that the probability of this happening was greater than it is. So I went to cover the ambulance call one day, and some guy had a 1-foot piece of wood from a table saw that kicked back and was stuck in his eye, and they couldn't pull it out. And I swear to you, I've never used a power tool without a safety goggles. I will stop what we're doing. Let's go get it right now, right? I don't, just from the one thing. And that's not a thing that every police officer or first responder has seen. But what have you seen? And do you think about those if you're in a similar situation later, right? One night we went to a 4th of July call where 2 guys were just with their families outside of their houses lighting fireworks, and they get into an argument and they get pissed at each other. And what do? They go back in the house, they each go get guns, come out with them in their waistband, and now they're more emboldened, so they're talking trash, and they both pull out guns and shoot each other in front of their families. One guy dies, the other guy gets hit right in the testicles. And it's like, so then I'm like lighting fireworks. I'm like, man, this could go bad. I'm gonna get into a fight with my neighbor. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like, can it happen? And so even if you were just going to Starbucks for a drink or going grocery shopping, the people that you saw do that, even though these things are happening millions of times a day without a problem, the ones that you're coming in contact with, they got broadsided by a DUI driver, or they were walking to the Starbucks and someone went up on the curb and ran them over. And so you start to think that the probability of this is higher. So I moved to Florida. I go out, I have this opportunity to take a 21-foot boat out on the ocean. And this should be some liberating, joyous experience where it's just me and Mother Earth and God, and we're just out there and I'm terrified, you guys. I had wrapped that cord from the engine around me. So if I hit my head, because I watched a YouTube video and somebody hit their head and they got knocked out, and I'm like, okay, if I get knocked out, it'll pull the cord. I don't want to like keep driving to the Bahamas. So, and then I put, well, what if I get ejected? What if I hit my head and get, so I put the life vest on that had the CO2 things that when you hit water, it goes, psh, they blow up. And then I thought, well, what if I get knocked unconscious to go in the water and these things don't expand? So I took the throw that you're supposed to throw overboard and I just wrapped it around my arm just in case. This is me going on the ocean and where it's supposed to be this glorious moment. And I'm like trying to think of every conceivable thing that might go wrong and guard against it. And my therapist said, what do you think's gonna happen to you? You're gonna die? I said, yes, that's what I thought was gonna happen. I am really good friends with a deputy coroner that I met at work in Denver. And his stories all start the same. He'll say, well, this guy was out in his yard doing the Christmas lights, and since I'm telling the story, you know it didn't go well. And that's like kind of, that's kind of what the way it is for us, right? Like if you saw it, it probably didn't go well. So what effect does that have on you over time? 68% of police officers are more anxious now since becoming a police officer. Can I just stop for a moment? Like 68% of the cops I surveyed are saying, I have more anxiety now. Okay, that's a big number to me. 47% of police officers are fanatic about safety precautions. 69% of police officers see trauma, death, and injury on a regular basis. 62% of the cops believe people die all the time doing regular activities, which they do, but in the scheme of the people doing them, it's such a minute number, but I think our probability gets changed a little bit. 68% of police officers have seen mundane activities result in death. That's what we were talking about. And 50% think that the likelihood of being killed on duty is high. What I'm trying to get at is like, how often are you worrying about your own death? And we have to, as police officers, think about our death, right? It's a thing that we have to do probably more than everybody else. So I'm not saying don't think about it, but I'm saying, are you obsessing about it? Is it starting to become an obsession? That's where this mindfulness practice and the inventory can help you, because once you can identify what's happening here, you have power now. You're like, oh, I know what's going on. I don't like it. And if you don't like it, you can start to make changes, hopefully with counseling also. So this is a weird symptom. And you'll see the numbers here are not as big as the other ones, but it's an interesting one, and one that I suffered from also. So I don't remember who told me this, but they said, police work's 98% boredom and 2% sheer terror. So you're driving around, it's 2 in the morning, you're exhausted, you're about to fall asleep, and the next minute you're going 100 miles an hour, and your fellow coworkers have been shot or in a shooting, and your adrenaline's going. It's one of the only jobs where that can happen, right? So you're exposed to frequent adrenaline. And what happens over time is that if your highs are routinely high all the time, so if you're having these adrenaline dumps all the time at work, that becomes normal for you, right? People who aren't police officers, somebody may pull out in front of them in traffic once in a while and their heart beats for a while, okay. Or they may see one of us in the police car, go, and their heart beats for a while, but they're usually not faced with these kinds of situations over and over. So what can happen is that when you pull this away, if you are separating from the job, if you get a new assignment, if you're on vacation, if you're hurt, whatever, this may be becoming an issue for you. Just be on the lookout for it if you're in a high adrenaline area. And what starts to happen is, I just noticed, like, especially when I left the police department, I kept having things happen, and I thought, I should feel more about this. Like, this is a thing I just felt flat, all right? Like, this isn't in a crazy, horrible way, but just like, I didn't feel right. It was, I should be having more feelings. And the worry here is that you start to create adrenaline situations for yourself in order to get back to what you now think is normal by creating these highs. If you do that in a healthy way, like some exercise or rock climbing or something that's exciting, that's great, but we hope that people aren't doing it in an unhealthy way, like putting themselves in high-risk situations or high-risk sexual encounters that could cause problems for them. So this was what the research showed. 54% of the cops we surveyed said they're bored easily. 42% say they crave action and adrenaline. 57% of police officers have taken unnecessary risks while at work. 34% of police officers crave more action. 37% of police officers have daily adrenaline dumps on duty, and 29% of officers crave adrenaline dumps on duty. So just something to be mindful of, and where you're at, and how often it's happening, and has there been a time when you went on vacation where it was pulled away? Or are you trying to manufacture these situations? Something to think about. All right, so where does all this lead to? Well, it can lead to depression, and if you've isolated yourself and you're antisocial and you're always on guard, this is a dangerous recipe. So we found depression numbers in our surveys 3 times that of the national, the civilian population, okay, in police officers. And I believe personally that we haven't talked about and identified this storm specifically like this. So I believe personally this lack of understanding and this lack of awareness, because it's this slow onset of over time, that it's causing it's putting police officers in a bad place. So these numbers, I believe, are staggering. 46% of the cops we surveyed say they are more depressed since they became a cop. 38% say they currently have depression issues. 53% of the police we surveyed said they can't talk with their family. 49% said they can't talk with their coworkers. So now you have all this happening, and you also feel like you can't talk to your family and your coworkers? I mean, we can't go there, right? That's so dangerous. So we've got to make some changes, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. 68% of police officers have noticed negative changes in their personality since they became the police. That's another crazy number to me. 24% of police officers don't know how to cope with what they've seen. We got just a quarter of the people we surveyed said, I don't even know what to do with this, right? And that's a terrible place. And then the last one is alcohol and substance abuse issues. So what we're hoping is that people aren't turning to alcohol and substances for coping mechanisms. And, you know, look, we'll look at the results here. The drinking I worry about more for police, right? That if you're using drinking to cope with things as your primary coping method, I mean, we all sometimes I'm just gonna have a few beers tonight because I need to escape. 21% of these cops said they use drinking as a means of escape. I mean, we're probably all guilty of that, but is that your primary reason? Are you doing that a lot? Is that how you're trying to manage this? But 36% of the cops said they drink more since becoming a cop. 11% of police officers say drinking is a problem for them. And 24% worry that drinking could be a problem for them. So a quarter of the cops are like, yeah, it's on my radar that this could be a problem. And 1 out of 10 is saying it already is a problem. 18% of the police officers we surveyed know of a coworker who has died as a result of drugs, and 37% know of someone who's died as a result of alcohol. I think these numbers are high. And listen, I'm not saying drug use doesn't happen in police departments, because we probably all, especially in a department like this, you know of 1 or 2 instances. And I know of a couple people in the Denver Police Department who died as a result of alcohol use. So, but when that happens, everybody knows about it. So I think those numbers, I don't think that's an indication of how often it's happening, but I think it's an indication of that it is happening, that we all know it's happening. And I do think that those are the extreme cases, but you don't want to end up there, so just have it on your radar. So the police suicide rates, we heard Melissa talk about it. We had 140 plus the last time we updated this slide. So to hear 146 this morning is really upsetting. I had 3 Denver police officers, the department's about 1,500 cops, from July of 2018 to July of 2019 kill themselves from my department, just 3 in 12 months. So it's now a problem, big time, and it has been for a few years. So we have to change the culture. We have to start looking out for ourselves, and we have to change the culture and this communication and this barrier. So we're going to talk about that now. Some of the challenges we face, we have the cop speak, right? Well, the investigation revealed that the suspects entered the window through the northeast bedroom by, we don't talk about feelings as the police. You guys, we start off this conference like, is this guy going to talk about feelings? Is that how we're going to start this? Yeah, I am. So it's not really a thing that we do too often. And we're hard on each other, right? We're hard on each other. And I had this explained to me in the academy. Somebody said, listen, the reason we're hard on you is because if you can't take it in here, you won't be able to take it out there. And I think this came from a place of necessity. I think cops are not cruel to each other because it's fun, although it can be, right, when you mess with somebody. But I think it was born out of a place of necessity, where that was how it was being handled. That's how the culture was doing it. So let's be hard on each other. Let's thicken up your skin. Let's toughen you up so when this stuff happens, you can deal with it better. But I don't think that's working. So we can change with the times, and everybody knows how much police love change. So, but we can change with the times. When the guys that came through the academy when I was there went to the academy, they said, if you have a problem, go have a drink and shut your mouth, right? When I came through in 1999 in the academy, they said, we have a police psychologist. If you want to talk to them, it's anonymous and it's free, so you can use it. Now, I don't know what's happening at the academy now, but it is better than it was when I went through. But let's start this dialogue, and it's up to each of us to be talking about it in a productive way, right? And to be open about it. I think it would be really something if we could have police officers start to feel like they can talk to coworkers without being made fun of, right? And I'm not talking about all kumbaya. I'm just talking about, like, just as people, we can make that change. And you couple all this with this stigma about mental health, and some of it rightfully so. Like, what if I speak up and I say I'm having problems and I get benched, or I get taken off the job, I get fired? It's too big of a risk to speak up. I'm hoping police departments around the country can minimize this by having programs in place that allow for people to say, hey, I'm starting to have some problems without repercussions on the job. So how do you work with law enforcement distress syndrome? What do we do about it? I'm hoping we can do this collectively across the nation, but I believe this starts with mindfulness and inventory, and I believe knowledge is power. I believe you knowing about this gives you the radar to look out for this stuff. And I was asked by a department outside of just in the suburbs of Chicago to put together an 8-hour training on this. So I put together this curriculum, and it does talk about mindfulness and inventory, but there's diet, and there's exercise, and there's counseling. There's all kinds of things that you can do to help yourself get better so that you don't go down this wormhole. Now, underlying all of the problems we're having is communication. You may think, well, that's a separate issue, Steve. You want to talk about communication. You talked about it in the beginning. It's not, because what's lacking here is communication amongst ourselves about what's happening, about all of these things. So we need to be better at communication in general. And I'm hoping, and we've been in touch with a lot of like law enforcement executives and stuff, that we can change the way we're speaking as a department. So I'm going to talk about two different communication methods. One is what the department's saying, and one is what everybody else is saying to the folks they're coming in contact with if you are not speaking for the organization, right? So the old way the organization speaks to people is they say, it's an investigation, we'll get back to you, right? I mean, you don't want to jeopardize the investigation, so you don't tell a lot of facts. Well, the media goes off, especially in high-profile instances where there's controversial instances, and they start interviewing who? Anyone that will talk, right? Which is the citizens and witnesses going, dang, that was messed up, because a use of force never looks good. You know, there was a clip of a police officer handcuffing somebody, and all of a sudden he slams the suspect's head down on the trunk of the car, and everybody went wild. And then a second angle from the camera surfaces, and they show that while he was patting the suspect down, he reached back and grabbed his genitals and squeezed as hard as he could. And you're like, oh, okay. So it looked like, but it never looks good. You can tase people, use batons, whatever, body slam them. It doesn't look good if that's the clip you see. So departments have to change the way they speak. They can't say we're looking into it anymore. Hopefully, they can start to say things. So what I try to do as the PIO was like, maybe we can start to talk about instances in general instead of this particular instance. So there was a shooting in Miami Beach that I did on one of my podcasts as a deconstruction, and there was a woman in a car that wasn't heeding commands, and they're trying to get her out of the car, and anyway, she starts speeding toward a crowd of people, and they end up using deadly force on her. And you know, the police department literally said it's an investigation, we'll get back to you, right? And they start interviewing other people. But I think it's okay as an organization to start saying things like, this is an open investigation, we will look into it, but we want everybody to know that when you endanger the lives of hundreds of people using a motor vehicle, we are going to stop you from doing that. You can still say things like that as an organization. And I think that will have an overall effect on law enforcement distress syndrome because of the fact that the media and the public doesn't understand the job, and we have not done a good job of communicating as departments. And so if everybody's idea of what the cops do is Law and Order and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, that's way off, right? The CSI effect, it's horrible. We have to start communicating about what it's really like so that people understand, oh, because they get that other camera angle, right? That other perspective, and they go, okay, well, that makes sense. Because most people, there's some people we'll never get to, we'll never convince, but most people are pretty reasonable when they hear it. But when you tell them 9 months later in a district attorney letter, they've already made up their mind, and they've already made up their mind about the next 20 things that have happened too, and they've forgotten all about it. It's too late. So I think we have to adapt with what's happening, which is this instant gratification of information, and we have to somehow find a way to get that out there in the beginning. So if you're not communicating on behalf of the organization, it's important that you communicate, because one victory at a time. So the example I like to use of this is, I used to be in the patrol car and I would go to Starbucks and I would park up against the curb and people would say, well, it must be nice to be able to park wherever you want, or can I give you a ticket, you know, a parking ticket? And I'd always take, for the first while, I would take some time and I'd say, hey, you know, if your daughter was being beaten by her boyfriend or her husband, you'd want my car close so I can get there and help. Or if somebody walks into a situation and starts shooting, trust me, you want my car close. Also, there's people that might need help in the vicinity, and if my car's right here, they know where I'm at, so they can come get help. And if anything, there's all kinds of reasons. Your equipment, your rate, there's a million reasons. What did the department do? They're like, you can't do that anymore unless it's an emergency. But I thought they should have come out. But me personally, I would explain to people that, well, fast forward like 8 years and someone's like, must be nice to park like that. And I'm like, why don't you go away, right? You know? Or mind your own business. And I really just think it's incumbent on us to take that extra minute and explain those things, because most people were like, oh yeah, that was, okay, well, have a good day, thank you for what you do. So I think you can have an effect even if you're not speaking on behalf of the organization. Where do we go from here? Law enforcement distress syndrome, I think, is affecting police officers across the country. I do believe knowledge is power. And there was a lady that I worked with at the Denver Police Department who was a deputy chief. She went on to be a deputy commissioner of the NYPD, and her name is Tracy Kazee. And she has a equity and policing organization in New York. She's one of my dear friends, and she's doing this separate research that's showing that when you leave the job of police officer, it's extremely difficult. That the loss of identity, because we have identified with this job more than most people, and we've lost power because we're not the police anymore, that it's proving to be very difficult. There was the New York, the chief that took his own life right before his retirement. That it's very difficult to leave the job. And I can tell you I was not prepared for that. And I think one of the ways I coped with this was to still write and speak and do all these things police related. And I still have my badge and I still have my federal permit, so I have a gun. I don't really feel like I'm not a cop, but I'm not trying to get that into my head. But it was a shock. And so if you're getting, it's something that Tracy Kazee talks about, is that you need to be thinking about when you leave or are separated, just at least put it in your mind. You know, what are your hobbies, and do you have things that are gonna make you happy? Because it is a difficult transition. It really is. Prevention and management, I'm hoping that I can help people. I'm really just hoping that I can talk about what I've written about and what I've researched, and that I can spread the word about it, and I don't need to do it all. I'm hoping we can all do this together, that you can tell people about this, that this resonated with you, and that we can figure out together, because I don't have all the answers, right? I just am trying to start this on my own, frankly, right? That's how this began, just me writing about stuff and talking about it. So I need everybody's help, right? We need to do this together. And just like the hurricane, we're in the beginning stages of this, but we have more. We should be researching this more and talking about it more and identifying it more and finding out more solutions. This is not a message today of feeling sorry for the police. I don't want you to be, oh, this job of police is so hard. We have it so bad. That's not, I don't think that's the way I've come across, and I don't want that to be our message. That message doesn't resonate with people anyway. This is a message to you about empowering you to take back your happiness. And if you're happy, great, file this away, use it, save it for a coworker. But if you're not, or you have some room to improve, which I think we all probably do a little bit, right? Then what steps are you going to take, and can you be thinking about what steps you're going to take to make it better? Because this job is such a sacrifice, and it's such a brave thing that you guys do. It shouldn't deteriorate and take away from your personal enjoyment of the one life that we have so far as we know, right? So don't let that happen. There is always hope. You can make this difference, and I think if you notice these things happening, hopefully you're also getting counseling, but even the cops that come visit me, they're like, I see them challenge themselves, I see them push themselves, I see them like, I notice that I'm doing what you're talking about, and I don't want that to do that. But when you don't know what's happening, and you don't know what it's called, what are you gonna do about it? So that's what I'm hoping that I've done for you today. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your time. There's my contact information. Please call me, email me, write me, whatever you want to do. If you need anything, I'd be happy to do whatever I can for you. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here. And please be safe, because I tell you this, I say this all the time, that without you, as we saw in Katrina and any other instance where there's the slightest possibility that people can get away with stuff, society would literally descend into anarchy and chaos, and people would be getting looting, and their stuff would be getting robbed, and they'd be getting raped, and it would be chaos without you. And it's not understood, so thank you very much.